Hello and welcome to this episode of Your HR Career. I am very delighted to be interviewing Steve Dania today. Welcome, Steve.
Oh, hello, Jane. Nice.
Hello. Now, we know each other pretty well, so we'll be fairly relaxed in our chat. And Steve's background is L&D and a whole load of other interesting things that I didn't know about until we were prepping for this conversation. So I'm really interested to get into some of that detail. As with all the people I'm interviewing, I shared a number of questions with you to get some prep beforehand. So I'm delighted to see some of them. You haven't spared your own blushes, which I like to see. Some people have been a little bit coy, but I'll decide how much we reveal your weaknesses to the world.
Oh,
so we'll see where we go. But let's begin at the start. So question I'm starting with everybody is, so how did you get into an HR career? And I'm using HR as a shorthand for HR and learning. For any learning people who get excited about that, it's just less letters.
Good. I'm glad you made that disclaimer, actually, because I am learning and development. But actually,
do you see them as different? Do you think are we different breeds? Do you think?
No, I think we're in the same group, actually. But I think sometimes, when people talk about HR, especially the bad side of HR, redundancies, and I tend to make that distinction so people see me as one of the nice guys as opposed to.
Okay, so it's about your personal rep.
Absolutely. I like to see.
I'm there for that. So I might encourage myself to say HR and learning as we go through. But if I say HR, take it as a catch-all.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So tell me where your interest in L&D came from then, Steve. Where did it all begin for you?
Yeah, so it actually didn't naturally start with HR or L&D because my degree was statistics and management, and actually I just thought I had to use that degree, and so I decided to use the maths and statistics part of it to get a job as a credit risk analyst at Experian, and did that for 2 years. I felt it was okay, but I just had this distinct feeling that this was not what God put me on earth for, because I just did not feel that excitement, and I was and this happened perhaps, or I started to realize this 6 months into my employment. And so it took me a while because I was procrastinating, thinking, am I doing the right thing? And eventually I actually spoke to somebody who gave me some really good advice, and actually that was my initial introduction to coaching. So this lady quite happily said to me, Steve, what's the worst thing about going to Japan? Because I was thinking about a career break, just to really think about and focus on my career. And Japan was a country that excited me. So anyway, procrastinated for quite a number of months. And eventually this lady said to me, what's the worst thing that could happen to you if you went? And what's the best thing? And it soon became apparent that Japan, I must go. And so whilst I was there teaching English as a second language, I realized that I had a natural affinity to help people understand complex things. I made learning fun, and I just thought there might be something in this, actually, because actually when I look back at even at university, when I used to help my friends understand maths, they always came to me because I had the patience and the aptitude to break down complex matters into bite-sized, understandable, theories. And so that got me thinking about maybe I've got some skills here. And so anyway, I was there for 2 years and then came back to the UK with the aim of going into learning and development, and spoke to a few career advisors as well as recruitment agencies, thinking, yes, I want to go and become a learning and development advisor. And then they broke the news to me to say, well, great, you've got transferable skills, but what is going to hold you in good stead is the practical applications of being a learning and development specialist. And so they advised me to start at the bottom, which was to start to pick up some admin skills. Anyway, I took that on board, and through various iterations of becoming a recruitment consultant through to in-house recruiter, I then got a call from a recruiter who I know very well, Clara Ridley, who just rang me out of the blue to say, I've got a job for you that I think you might like. And then I said, please tell me more. And then she told me about this opportunity at Pinsent Masons, and it was a graduate development officer. So without thinking about it, I went, did all my prep, got interviewed, and then I got the job. And actually, this is where I found my place in terms of what I wanted my career to look like. And so
Fantastic.
yeah.
Let's just pause there. That is super interesting. I will pull out a couple of things that you said. Firstly, I'm really excited and interested in your description of basically you were seeking joy from work, weren't you?
Yes.
And and nobody said that yet. And I love that, because surely that's what we're doing it for. I mean, sure, there's money and et cetera, but it has to kind of light you up inside, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what you were looking for then, wasn't it? As you were being an analyst of whatever level, excellent, I'm sure, but you just weren't loving it.
No. And actually, I was fast forwarding myself to thinking, actually, is this something that I could do for the rest of my life? Because I was in my early 20s, and I just the thought of doing this day in, day out, manipulating data.
Because you could, couldn't you? You could have done that.
Yes. And I know a lot of people who do
fill
that.
you with joy. So I love that. The other thing that I'm really interested in is your talk about you had this idea of going to Japan, taking a career break. You kind of knew that this role, this risk analyst route, wasn't right for you. What do you think about it? You described it as procrastinating. So you might say, oh, I was, I don't know, risk averse or scared, or maybe you're just more considered, so it took you long enough to get to it. What is it, do you think, within you that creates that, what you describe as procrastination? Others may not, but
well, it was a big decision, actually, and I think as humans we're sort of there's societal conditioning in terms of you've got a good job, you're earning really well, you have to start to knuckle down and start paying your student debts as well as contributing to a pension. And so I was, in fact, I think I frustrated a lot of my friends, actually, because I kept on saying, should I go or should I stay? And I think it was just that fear, actually. So you talk about being risk averse. I think, yes, I think on one hand, I think I was risk averse, but, I just had to sort of balance the fact that future happiness versus, me just being stale, and so I think it was a no-brainer.
You analysed the risks.
Yes, no,
absolutely. Took you a while, but you got there.
Absolutely.
Loving this. Fantastic. So you have essentially created for yourself the career that you wanted, is what I'm hearing, and that you had that clarity of, I've got a higher purpose here, and it's clarifying, and it's sharing, and it's infusing, and it's teaching, however that might come about.
Yes.
And you talk about setting that goal, that you had this clarity of that's what you wanted to achieve. Where do you think that kind of desire for goals comes from? Is that something?
I don't think it was deliberate, actually. I don't think it was deliberate, because when I look back, I've always been somebody who, whilst I appreciated the thought of setting goals in place, for me, it was more of a, I'll see where the wind blows, and if I like it, I'll explore it, and if I don't, I'll leave. And so it wasn't until my sort of second career moment that I realized the importance of goal setting, because what I ended up doing actually was just doing things, working as hard as I possibly can to try to get the recognition, but not necessarily thinking about what is next. And it took me perhaps later on to realize the importance of saying, okay, this might be what I want to explore next, because then that way I either gave myself the opportunity to get that kind of exposure or rule it out. And so I think that was probably in hindsight what I didn't do. And now that I recognize the fact that goal setting is quite an important thing to do, it's helped me analyze, because I think for me it was more just doing the job, getting recognition, but just waiting for the business to say you're ready. And actually, when I rewind back, I think I should have taken more control and ownership of my own career by setting those milestones.
Oh, I love that. Okay, yeah. And is it partly because traditionally, so in the eras that you and I started in the workplace, you sort of had to be quite grateful for the job you got, and then
Oh,
you
yeah.
would wait to have a tap on your shoulder to say you're ready to move.
Oh,
Would you
yes,
agree with
no,
that?
absolutely. And I think this is something that I think sometimes being in a support function, one of the unintended consequence could be that you're almost secondary to the fee earning population.
Yeah.
So unless you start to recognize the value you bring to organizations, sometimes you weren't really told. You almost made to feel grateful for what you were given.
Yes, and anyone who's worked in law firms, especially, but professional services as well, I describe it as, when they're doing safety announcements on the planes and they say you have to put your own air mask on first. It's like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yes.
I think HR and learning, we have to tell ourselves the positive stories and give ourselves the pat on the back,
Yes.
and not wait for it to come from others.
Oh, yeah.
So it requires a level of internal energy that I
Yes.
think other
Absolutely.
functions might
Absolutely.
not need. Yeah.
No,
So
you're
if we apply that then to careers, you said instead of waiting, with hindsight, you think maybe I could have pushed harder and had clearer goals.
Yeah.
So tell me about, I'd asked a question about your power move, and you talked about when you changed sector.
Yes.
So tell me about that. How did that come about? How did that feeling come about, and how did you make it happen?
Well, I suppose because I'd spent quite a number of years in the graduate development space, in the sense that I enjoyed what I was doing, but it then soon dawned on me that it was because it's almost cyclical, actually, because you have half yearly intakes where you orientate people, you develop them, and then you look into the next round of intakes, and so it becomes cyclical. And I just realized that every year the graduates were getting younger, I was getting older, and I just thought I kind of wanted to get into a space where I was now dealing with individual contributors as opposed to just the grads. And yeah, so that was probably one of the things that prompted that move, actually. And I suspect because I wasn't really good at selling myself or selling my transferable skills, internal opportunities weren't available. And when I sort of engage external recruiters, the feedback was, yeah, you're great, but you've niched yourself in the graduate development space. So taking that leap was just not at the time possible. And so when that role, and it was actually an old boss of mine or an old manager of mine who actually moved to Robert Walters and said, actually, Steve, I've got this role, I'm setting up this learning and development team, I think you'd be perfect. And then got me in, that I felt that was my power move, because then finally I felt like I could build my skill set, right, and start dealing with leadership, managers, as well as the grads. But I just felt that there was a shelf life in terms of the graduate development space. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it, around if you spend too long in one sector, particularly if it's quite a niche sector like graduate recruitment in professional services. I mean, you could have stayed in that forever and become, quite senior in that in larger organizations. But unless you take the bravery to make the move at the right time, you can end up in a cul-de-sac.
Yes, no, correct.
And for you, it was that there was somebody who knew you already, so could see your transferable skills and therefore was able to advocate for you.
Yes. No.
And sometimes companies recruiting can be conservative, can't they? They want somebody who's got a track record in their sector.
Yeah.
And how did you find that shift of sectors?
Sorry, beg your pardon.
How did you find the shift of sectors? Was it a challenge?
I think it was, because after a while you almost become institutionalized. So I think initially I was, I always have this habit of looking at previous employers with rose-tinted glasses. And so rather than appreciating the new sector, I was almost missing, what I really crave for in the legal sector. And actually, until I realized that I'd actually made that move, and actually I needed to see the benefits of what this new opportunity can give me, that was when things changed. So I think I had to really work on my mindset as well, because I think you were conditioned to, that mentality of you've got to shape up or ship out, that you get when you work in that, in the legal sector.
Yeah. And it's cozy, isn't it?
Yeah, really cozy. You
get good stuff.
Yeah. And actually, another thing as well, actually, in the legal sector is, yes, it can be quite brutal, but they have the infrastructure
Yeah.
to make it great for individuals to thrive. So for me, I was a specialist in my role. Whereas, when you then move sectors where you then had to learn to become a generalist and do it all, I think that was something that took a bit of getting used to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think each sector, each environment brings that new challenge. And do you have that feeling that your career is sort of each layer has added complexity? It sounds to me you were broadening as you went.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that was something that was deliberate, actually, because I think at one stage, and my friends and peers always look at me and think, oh, Steve, you're always moving around. When are you going to actually just stop and just. And actually, for me, it was more strategic, actually, because I felt that I had to move either for more salary, an increase in salary, or actually more responsibilities, because and so my whilst to the untrained eye it could look as if Steve was moving around, I was incrementally adding to my skill set in terms of more challenge, more responsibility. So I moved from the graduate development space to working with individual contributors to leadership, etc. So it was a strategic move, actually.
And how do you develop that then? Have you got a coach behind the scenes? Have you got 57 textbooks? Is it an internal drive? Where does that kind of goal setting come from?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of my internal drive, because actually, when you sort of become an unknown, when you move roles, you become an unknown, and all they can go by is, what you say in terms of during the interview process, in terms of what you can deliver. So I always knew, I knew that the pressure was on. So for those, for my skills gaps, I had to learn. So I actually engaged a personal coach to help me sort of become more comfortable engaging with senior stakeholders. I also went on to courses. I self-funded my coaching qualifications, for example, and then self-help books as well came into. But I think that's helped my natural inquisition, because in terms of my learning agility, I think that's held me in good stead, because I'm always interested in not just the theory, but also making sure that with all these great concepts, especially around within learning and development, you need to break it down into how do you make it relatable? How do you make key concepts applicable to managers, so that it doesn't feel like you're reading off a textbook, or it works in theory, but what about the practical application? So that for me, that's always something that I've been really keen to sort of empower people with, to say, look, you can be better at whatever you're doing. However, I'm going to give you the tools and the skills to make sure you can make marginal gains in terms of your learning and how you evolve as a leader, for example.
And I think that is a super inspiring list you gave there, Steve, of how you manifested what you wanted to achieve by investing in yourself in a literal sense, paying for support, but also by keeping that focus on development and energy. So for newer people starting out in HR and learning, is there one textbook, one thought leader that you would recommend? Who's your current kind of preferred person you would recommend a book to read?
Okay, so Brené Brown, is always on my top shelf. I just love how inspirational she is. I also love, some of the theory that comes from Amy Edmondson, especially as she talks about psychological safety. And then also what I would encourage people to do is to subscribe to the Harvard Business Review, because they've got some really great publications, video clips, etc. So I always like to read bite-sized, read, watch, listen resources.
Yeah. Fantastic. Good. And so if you were giving a piece of advice to somebody starting out in an HR and learning career, what one piece of advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a difficult one, actually, but I suspect I think it would probably be about the goals, actually, because First of all, I think I would say give yourself the exposure, because HR is so broad, and I
Yeah.
think you're not going to know what you don't know. So give yourself the opportunity to at least experience the broad areas of HR until you find a specialism that you enjoy. That could be comp and bends, that could be generalist HR, that could be learning and development, that could be reward and compensation. So I would say if you're starting off, because I think HR is so broad and it can be quite confusing for a lot of people, because they just see HR and sometimes they don't realize, the different intricacies of HR. Because when I left, Japan, in my head, I was thinking a career in HR. And it was only until I started working closely with HR, because obviously at, Pinsent Masons, we were really close as a HR team. So you get involved in a lot of the things that brought the strategy together. And actually it soon dawned on me that actually there were a lot of generalist HR activities that I didn't allow, that I wasn't passionate about, because especially the admin side of things. So I think that would be one of the advices that I would give, is to sort of give yourself the exposure to understand what HR is and which area you'd want to specialize in.
Yeah, so try and look at as much as you can before you kind of find where you fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, you're talking about joy, Steve, and it delights me. This idea that we look for something that excites us and engages us, because surely we're going to do our best work.
Absolutely. And you know what was interesting, actually, because many years ago I got accredited on the Hogan assessment, and it was interesting when I went through my Hogan report, and actually it aligned, my drivers aligned with the things I now do. So so it was interesting to have that validated by Hogan.
Yeah, and some people have a real sense of themselves, don't they?
Yes.
And other people, it takes a long time for them to learn that.
Yeah.
So I think it can be quite interesting looking back and thinking, actually it was always there.
No, absolutely.
And I am in the right place.
Yeah. And for me, it's really important, actually, because one of the things I would say is if you find something that you really enjoy, it's going to be tough. There are going to be challenging days. There are going to be days that are going to be frustrating. But actually, if you're passionate about what you do, then you don't quit.
Yeah.
It gives you momentum to carry on. Whereas I see people, and actually I see this in my everyday sort of lives dealing with employees, colleagues, where they're not in the right role and they're doing it either because of the financial rewards. And so when they come across setbacks, that's when you see them really struggle. Yeah. Whereas for me, when I encounter setbacks, I think of it as a way to navigate. How do you navigate it? And in my head, I always think it's only temporary. It's temporary. Whereas, I think if I wasn't passionate about what I did, then I just think it will, I just don't think I will be doing what I do if I wasn't passionate about what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So we have time for one last question. Yep. So tell me, where are you now in your career and what's next for you?
Okay, so this is a really interesting question, actually, because I was promoted recently to Group Head of Learning and Development at Sheffield Hallam. Oh, no, thank you very much, actually. And my current priorities is to drive sustainable people and organizational development through the firm. And I really want to ensure that all my deliverables are aligned to the company strategy, but so whether or not this is by rolling out sustainable learning solutions or coaching, etc. So that's my priority for now. But in terms of what's next for me, well, all I'll say right now is that I am aiming high and I have got my mid to long-term goals in place, but I'll keep that.
Of course you have. We would expect nothing less.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. Well, good luck with all of that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
My pleasure.
I found it super interesting. Even though I felt like I knew you before, I've learned a lot about you in this little chat. So I hope everybody else finds it useful too. Thank you very much, Steve, for your time. And thanks to everybody for listening. You can find the other episodes of Your HR Career on my Substack page. And if you'd like some behind the scenes content and early access, do sign up to the newsletter. And thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Jane.